Hello, I'm Thomas Clancy and I'm here at Lawschool.ie and I'm the law lecturer involved in property law delivery here. Now, when we're looking at property law, we're looking at land law and the property surrounding it is a course that a lot of people find a little bit dry. I don't think it is, and I think that we can find some warmth and humour and intelligent observation in this course. We're going to think about this at all times in view of with the FE1s to the forefront of our views. Property law in Ireland has a long history, and in fact it's probably one of the oldest forms of law that we have in this jurisdiction, and it's the kind of thing that everyone thinks they know a little bit about, and you've got the idea of the lovely field which is central to our experience. But that lovely field very quickly, as we can see, becomes divided and you get a wall down it, and suddenly that land is yours and mine. And the minute land is yours and mine, well, then we have to think about how we divide that land up, how we ascertain which is ours, and then in this more complex field system that we see here, which one of them is ours, and if I want to swap one for another, how do I do that? If I want to leave some of this land to my friends or relatives, how do I do that? And then if I want to walk across or access different parts of other people's land or build on it, how do I do that? This is the ideal of Irish land law. The land that is our own, that gives us comfort and security right there in the middle of nature. But of course, the reality is that our experience of land these days is property in houses, in estates, and in apartments. So we see that the land law of Ireland has evolved and changed very rapidly over the last 15, indeed over the last 5 years. And if you look at acts like the Land and Conveyancing Reform Act of 2009, we can see, and the multi-user development initiatives, we see that land law is adapting to the way in which we operate today. Yes, it is true that land law, and this course is one where we're going to experience a little looking through the feudal system, and we're going to experience that idea of history invading the law that we so studiously are interested in. But we have to understand that feudalism is still with us. And even if we look here at the 2009 Act, we see that in Section 9, what should have been an end to feudalism and not having to deal with it at all in a class is somewhat circumspect, or the way in which it was resolved was somewhat circumspect. Section 9 says, from the commencement of this part, ownership of land comprised of the estates and interests specified in this part, insofar as it survives, the feudal tenure is abolished. That's terrific, and it sounds like we could leap straight into, in a contemporary property law course, the estates and transfers and so forth. But of course, if you look down to subsection 3, subsection 2 says feudal law is abolished. Subsection 3 then suddenly comes in and says subsection 2 does not affect A, the position of the state under the State Property Act of 1954, 2, section 73 of the Act of 1965, B, the concept of the estate under section 10, D or C, any fee found grant made in derogation of the statute Creemptoris 1290, and of course finally any surviving customary right or franchise. Well, that's a pretty extensive set of exceptions to the abolition of the feudal system, and if we look at section 10 here, you'll see that it says the concept of the estate is retained and subject to this act continues with interests specified in this part to the nature and extent of land ownership. In other words, I'm afraid the concepts and underpinnings of land law have to be rooted in a historical understanding of essentially the history of this island. But it's one that's exciting and interesting, and it's one that I think we can put into context to make our understanding of land and land law and property law in this jurisdiction a lot easier. The first thing we have to say is just have a look at that. There's the classic picture of a will, and we've got the gavel there. Well, the gavel, obviously a symbol of law at one stage, but now an auctioneer's symbol. And that's really why land, why property, and why property law is so important, but also so necessary to even the earliest engagement as a practitioner. So as someone hoping to engage in practice of law, this is an area of land, this is an area of law that is not just required to get through the FE1s, but this is going to be something that will stay with you and be an important part of your professional career going forward. So, property law, the law that travels with us through our life. It defines our place in the world, and it does so by our engagement, either leasing, or buying, or using, or passing on to others. These are the ways in which we engage with land, and that's the way to try and see land. Begin to see land not just as a series of endless cases and a series of centuries of statutes, but to ask the question, where is land and what does it do for me? And think about it coming out from you. How do I possess it? How do I use it? How do I acquire it? How do I give it away? These are the questions that we answer. And in this course, what we're hoping to do is bring the practical understanding of that will allow you to grab onto the way in which the questions are asked and answered in the FE1s. So we look at estates and wills and planning and co-ownership from the perspective of what am I doing with the land? How am I using it? How do I occupy it is landlord and tenant and the tenant statutory rights. How do I acquire this? And what happens when I acquire it? Mortgages, equity, the duties of mortgagors and mortgagees. What user restraints are they when I have finally acquired the land? Easements and trusts and family property and covenants. These sections of property law generally are brought in through this. And then finally, how do I give it away? Alienation, selling, or through, of course, a last will and testament through succession planning. The idea of land law, the idea of property law, which embodies land and the things, so essentially the idea of realty and personality, the idea of physical property and property that is attached to that physical property, property that exists within shares, property that exists within trusts. These are all part of the natural and constitutional rights of every one of us as a physical human being. And that's really where property law begins. And that's where we will begin this course, really, to try and understand the questions that are going to be asked in terms of us. If we can visualize ourselves at the center of a network of dealings with land law, then when questions come up on the paper, as they do very regularly, say on treasure trove, well, we can experience it as ourselves walking through the land and finding things within it. We can then look at the cases with that perspective on it. We want to essentially, in this course, make this a human-sized course for somebody who is trying to take this law and bring it towards the practical application in examination. And best doing that is through focusing the idea of land through your own eyes and through your own experiences. So on this course, we will cut through each of these elements and try to bring together the notion of a source of land as a source of wealth, the idea of physical possession, the idea of inequity and in trust relationships, and in future expectations. These are the way in which land exists for us. Now, land is also part of these big divides. There's big divides in land, and if we learn these carefully at the beginning, I think we can move through this course in a very methodical and hopefully, I think, a way that we can remember and utilize it with great flexibility and ease. So the big divides, between freehold and leasehold. The big divides between registered and unregistered land. Now, just even thinking about those are 4 questions from the last 3 years of papers that the FE1s have looked at, and they have returned again and again towards this idea of looking at the big divides with a view to asking questions about them. So registration, the idea of registration or unregistered land, is now a question on its own. And that question is a philosophical and political one to be supplied with the statutes and materials and the cases that we will show you, or that I hope to show you in this course, but essentially it does offer the opportunity to utilize this knowledge in a thinking and a very within the ecosystem of thinking about land as being centered upon us. And that idea of big divides, sole possession, co-ownership goes on through all or nearly all of land law, mortgaged and unmortgaged. And that is hopefully the way we can provide you with a good route to a knowledge of property law and using it, and using that knowledge in a way that hopefully will get the best results.